I'm Lily Sullivan, 32 years old, and I used to believe the best way to keep peace was to stay small. That illusion ended the night my phone lit up with Mom's name and the old command in her voice. "Cancel whatever silly plans you have for tomorrow," she said without even a hello. "Sarah's hosting 25 very important guests. I want you here by noon to start cooking. 7 mains, 10 sides, the good china." Her words carried that polished Connecticut edge. I'd grown up with velvet over iron. I kept folding my blazer into my suitcase, letting her voice wash past me like cold water. "What's happening tomorrow?" I asked evenly. "Sarah's networking group. Executives from Pinnacle Corporation. These people matter, Lily. People who matter." The phrase burned like it always did. Across the room, my laptop screen glowed with an unread email from Victoria Chen, CEO of Pinnacle Hospitality, confirming our pre-meeting dinner in Florida. If only Mom knew. I pictured the house I'd grown up in. Candles flickering in crystal sconces, garlands draped with obsessive precision. My own childhood room long ago converted into Sarah's walk-in closet. I could smell the pine and polish even from Manhattan, as if all those years of unpaid labor still clung to me. "Don't embarrass us," Mom finished, then hung up. For a moment, I just stared at the silent phone. 15 years of memories pressed in. Thanksgiving spent alone in a hot kitchen. The engagement party, where she introduced me as between opportunities. Birthdays, where Sarah's triumphs filled the toasts, and my achievements, real ones, never made the cut. My plane ticket lay on the bed, destination Florida, departure 8 p.m. tomorrow. My heart stayed steady. After a decade of swallowing hurt, I finally knew the difference between their emergencies and my priorities. I slipped another blouse into my suitcase, thinking of the company I'd built from scratch. Stellar events, 50 employees, 3 locations. Clients who sent thank you gifts and checks with more zeros than I'd ever imagined. And tomorrow's meeting with Pinnacle wasn't just another contract, it was the contract, the one that would catapult us nationwide. Still, old habits whisper. Maybe just this one last dinner, maybe keep the peace. But another voice, quiet, fierce, rose higher. Peace built on erasing yourself isn't peace, it's servitude. I set the suitcase upright and grabbed the leather folder that held my life's proof. Embossed contract drafts, glowing press clippings, our latest quarterly numbers. The folder felt heavier than any guilt my family could throw. The phone buzzed again, a text from Sarah. "Mom says you're cooking tomorrow. Don't screw it up. Victoria Chen will be there." The irony almost made me laugh. Victoria Chen, the very CEO flying to Florida to sign a $2 million deal with me, was about to sit in my parents' dining room, expecting to be served by their unemployed daughter. For a breathless second, I imagined staying, walking into that dining room in a tailored black suit, watching their faces as Victoria recognized me. But no, this choice wasn't about spectacle. It was about freedom. I set my phone face down. The Manhattan evening shimmered beyond the glass, yellow cabs sliding through wet streets, the distant wail of sirens. My apartment smelled of roasted coffee and possibility. I thought of my team, Maria, saving for her first house, James planning better schools for his kids, people who trusted me to show up tomorrow. They deserved a CEO who kept her word. A gust of wind rattled the window. My mind flashed to a Thanksgiving years earlier, when I'd presented a homemade pumpkin tart after 14 hours on my feet. Sarah had wrinkled her nose. "Rustic," she'd said, and Mom had nodded as if rustic meant failure. I'd smiled then, swallowing the hurt. Tonight, I let it surface, and with it came something steadier than anger. Clarity. I picked up the phone and, for the first time in my adult life, didn't call back. Instead, I opened my flight app, double-checked the 8 p.m. departure, and whispered to the quiet room, "Not this time." By the time the city's streetlights blinked on, my decision was sealed. I would fly to Florida, I would meet Victoria Chen, and I would never again confuse obedience with love. Tomorrow, when 25 VIPs arrived at the Sullivan Mansion, they would discover an empty kitchen. And my family would begin to discover who I really was. I woke early, hours before dawn, to the sound of soft Manhattan rain tapping against my windows. For the first time in years, my morning didn't begin with a to-do list written by someone else. I poured a slow cup of coffee and let the silence soak in. remembering how rare true quiet had been in the Sullivan household. Those memories arrived like sharp photographs. Thanksgiving after Thanksgiving where I cooked alone, my hands raw from carving turkeys and peeling potatoes while Sarah dazzled a roomful of relatives. Engagement parties where Mom waved me off with a quick, "Lily's between jobs," never mentioning that I was running pop-up catering events all over the city. Christmas Eves when Sarah opened designer gifts while I scrubbed the Waterford crystal she'd sipped eggnog from. The humiliation hadn't started yesterday. It had been layered, year after year, until even I had almost believed their story of me, invisible, unreliable, between opportunities. I sipped the coffee and opened the leather folder that told the truth. Inside were the contracts and proposals of Stellar Events, the company I'd built from the ground up. 5 years of grit and strategy, 50 employees, 3 thriving locations, and clients whose names made industry insiders raise their eyebrows. I'd even chosen a name that hid, Sullivan, as if the business had sprung from clean air. Last week, my team had thrown me a surprise holiday party. I could still hear Maria, my executive chef, telling the staff, "She believed in us before we believed in ourselves." We toasted our 3rd location and the $500,000 contract we'd closed that very morning. Yet when I texted my parents a simple, "Happy Holidays," they replied with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing more. I thought of my old bedroom back in Connecticut gone. 2 summers ago I'd visited to find my trophies and books boxed in the basement. The room itself transformed into Sarah's dressing suite. "Sarah needs space for her wardrobe," Mom had explained. "Image matters in PR." Image mattered. Apparently mine didn't. And there was the country club dinner just last month. Dad had leaned toward a golf buddy and said, almost cheerfully, "Sarah's our success story, Lily's between opportunities." I'd closed a $500,000 deal that very morning. A small, wry smile tugged at me. Between opportunities? I had been closing opportunities. My phone buzzed. Another message from Mom. "Don't forget the truffle oil. These people have sophisticated palates." Sophisticated palates. The absurdity made me laugh aloud. My company routinely catered for Forbes conferences and celebrity galas. Yet to my parents, I was the daughter barely capable of seasoning a roast. I set the cup down and let a heavier thought rise. Why had I stayed silent? Partly self-protection. The one time I'd dared mention a big client, Mom had pivoted within seconds to Sarah's latest PR triumph. "That's nice, dear, but Sarah's work is really taking off." It wasn't just dismissal, it was erasure, and it had trained me to hide every victory. Now, a new message from Sarah. "Mom says Victoria Chen will be there. Huge for my career. Don't embarrass us." The irony was almost poetic. Victoria Chen, the very woman flying to Florida to finalize my $2 million contract, would soon sit at my parents' mahogany table, expecting a flawless meal cooked by the unemployed daughter. I pictured the evening ahead. Guests clinking glasses, my mother bragging about Sarah's campaigns, and Victoria politely tasting pizza, ordered in panic. A sharper memory surfaced, one I'd buried deep. It was my 21st birthday. I had planned a small dinner with college friends at home. Mom canceled it the night before. "Sarah has an important networking dinner, and we need the kitchen." I ended up buying cupcakes in the rain and celebrating in a dorm lounge. That night I had whispered a promise to myself. Someday they will see me. It had taken a decade, but that day was finally here. I opened my laptop to review tomorrow's schedule. Pre-meeting dinner at 7 p.m., board presentation at 9 a.m., on the 26th contract signing immediately after. Pinnacle's contract wasn't just another deal, it would move Stellar Events from regional success to national name. The livelihoods of Maria, James, and dozens of staff depended on it. I imagined their faces. Maria, saving for her first home. James excited about new schools for his children. My choice wasn't between Christmas and career. It was between old obligations and the future of 50 families, mine included. The rain eased. Pale winter sunlight touched the glass, and with it came a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't rebellion. It was responsibility. I closed the folder and set it carefully in my carry-on. The phone buzzed again, Mom's voice message this time, sharp and familiar. I didn't play it. I no longer needed to. Instead, I wrote a quiet note and left it on the kitchen counter. 3 emergency catering numbers, my business card on top. I wasn't completely heartless, but I was no longer their servant. By late afternoon, my suitcase stood ready by the door. In a few hours, I would be in a car to JFK, bound for Florida and the life I had built with my own 2 hands. For 15 years, I'd been their invisible daughter. Tonight, invisibility ended. By late afternoon, Manhattan's gray drizzle had hardened into a steady, cold rain. I zipped my final suitcase and set it by the door, feeling the quiet weight of a decision already made. No last-minute change of heart, no secret hope of reconciliation, just certainty. At 5 p.m., my phone lit up again. Mom. I let it ring. Seconds later, Sarah. Then again, over and over until their names blurred across the screen. I finally answered, more to end the noise than out of doubt. Finally! Sarah's voice cracked with fury. Mom's calling everyone. She says you've lost your mind. Get over here. I have a business trip, I said evenly. Stop lying. You cook. That's what you do. Not tonight. Her words sharpened, slicing through the static. If you leave, you're dead to us. I took a breath. I've already been invisible to you for years. What's the difference? The silence on her end was almost physical. Then the call dropped. I set my phone face down and let the apartment breathe with me. Around me were the quiet proofs of a life they never bothered to imagine. A framed hospitality quarterly cover, a cabinet filled with wine from grateful clients, a leather-bound guest book signed by celebrities whose names my parents would brag about if only they knew. Still, kindness stirred in me like an old habit. On the kitchen counter, I placed a handwritten note with 3 reliable emergency catering numbers and, on top, my business card. Lily Sullivan, CEO, Stellar Events. If by some miracle they came looking, the truth would be waiting. At 6:30 p.m. sharp, the Uber text arrived. I pulled on a charcoal trench coat and stepped into the rain-washed city. Streetlights turned slick pavement into ribbons of gold. For once, I wasn't rushing to someone else's deadline. I was walking into my own. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, helped load my bags. Holiday trip? He asked. Business, I answered, and for the first time in years the word felt exactly right. Traffic crawled toward JFK. As we inched past familiar landmarks, memories surfaced uninvited. The Christmas Eve when I burned my hand basting a turkey because Mom had insisted on one last glaze. The engagement party, where Sarah stood in her $3,000 dress while I scraped dishes in the kitchen. I let those images rise and fade. They belonged to a life I was leaving behind. At the terminal, I paused to look back at the glittering skyline. A younger me might have called to say goodbye. Tonight, I walked straight to security. Inside the airport's warm buzz, everything felt like a quiet rebellion. The smooth check-in, the easy boarding pass scan, the simple fact of being here instead of in my mother's kitchen. I found a seat near the gate and opened my leather folder. Contracts, projections, and a printed Forbes draft shone under the fluorescent lights, solid proof of a future bigger than any family narrative. A final voicemail arrived from Dad. For years, he'd been mostly silent, the calm shadow beside my mother's thunder. Lily, his low voice said, I don't know what's happening, but I hope you're safe. I listened twice. It was the first message in years that carried no demand. Boarding began at 7:35. Rain streaked the giant windows as I walked down the jet bridge, each step lighter than the last. The seatbelt clicked like a seal on my new life. As the plane climbed through layers of gray, I let the city lights dissolve beneath me. Connecticut, with all its crystal goblets and unasked questions, shrank to a scattering of sparks. Above the clouds, quiet stretched wide and endless. I pulled out a small journal and began to write not about menus or deadlines, but about the moment I chose to stop shrinking. Tonight, I left invisibility behind, I wrote. I chose the life I built over the life they assigned me. The engines hummed like a vow. At 8:07 p.m., Flight 447 lifted fully into the dark, carrying me toward Florida, toward Victoria Chen, toward a morning that would rewrite everything. Below, somewhere in a grand Connecticut kitchen, 25 VIP guests would soon arrive to an empty stove and a single silent note. I closed my eyes and let the steady drone of altitude carry me forward. While I slept above the Atlantic, Connecticut braced for a storm of its own making. According to the frantic messages I read the next morning, the disaster unfolded hour by hour, with ruthless precision. By 6 p.m., my mother finally grasped that I truly wasn't coming. The kitchen, usually fragrant with cloves and rosemary, by this time stood as pristine as a showroom. Cabinets held only staples. The crystal platters she'd set out gleamed uselessly under the recessed lights. Panic flickered like a broken string of Christmas bulbs. Sarah fired off a text that reached my muted phone. "Mom's losing it. She's calling every restaurant within 50 miles. Everything's closed." Inside that house I knew so well, voices must have risen like steam. I could picture Sarah pacing in her velvet heels, clutching her phone while Mom barked orders that had nowhere to land. Dad would hover in the background, rubbing the same spot on his temple he always did when tension mounted. By 6:45, he texted, "Your mother is having a breakdown. Please reconsider." But reconsideration belonged to a different life. 7 o'clock arrived, and with it, the first guests. The grand Sullivan foyer, dressed in white poinsettias and candlelight, opened to confusion. The air smelled faintly of floor polish, not roasting duck. Guests exchanged polite but puzzled glances. Sarah's next text came jagged. "They're here. No food. What are we supposed to do?" In the dining room, I could imagine the mahogany table gleaming under crystal chandeliers, place cards arranged like soldiers. Only the plates were empty. Conversations began as murmurs. Traffic was light. Such a mild winter, and soon shifted to curious questions. "Where's the chef?" My mother, who prized control like a second skin, must have felt each query like a pinprick. She picked up the phone again and again, only to hear the dead-end ring of after-hours caterers. By 7:23 p.m., desperation hardened into farce. "We're ordering pizza." "Pizza, Lily. Do you understand what you've done?" I almost laughed, imagining the scene. Waterford crystal goblets waiting to be filled beside cardboard pizza boxes. Guests adjusting silk ties as the scent of garlic butter replaced truffle oil. Yet beneath the comedy lay a deeper cruelty, one my family inflicted on themselves. For years they'd told a story about me. Unreliable, unemployed, only useful in the kitchen. Tonight that fiction came home to roost. At 7:47 p.m., another message. "Mom just told everyone you're unreliable and always have been. She says you ruined Christmas on purpose." Around that time, a silver Tesla eased into the icy driveway. Victoria Chen, CEO of Pinnacle Hospitality, stepping into the very house where I was supposed to cook for her. I imagined her taking in the chaos with the calm eye of someone who runs international resorts for a living. Later, Victoria herself would recount the moment. "Your mother kept apologizing and blaming this absent daughter. It was surreal." Inside, Sarah must have been juggling plates of cooling pizza while rehearsing PR pitches, her voice rising with forced brightness. "Try a slice of the spinach and feta, it's locally sourced." The juxtaposition almost made me wince. Some guests, I learned, left early. Investment bankers with tight holiday schedules, neighbors with other parties to attend. Victoria stayed barely 20 minutes, long enough to watch the family scramble and to hear Margaret Sullivan insist, with brittle dignity, that her elder daughter was mentally unstable and too stupid to keep a job. By 8:15 p.m., the final text arrived, stark as a door slam. "Party's over. Everyone left early. Mom says you're dead to her." I was thousands of miles away, the ocean humming beneath my plane, blissfully unaware. But I would soon learn that what began as a dinner failure had already ignited something larger, the unmasking of every false story my family had told about me. While Connecticut cooled into uneasy silence, I was checking into a Florida hotel suite where a chilled bottle of champagne waited with a handwritten note. "Welcome, Miss Sullivan. Looking forward to our partnership. 2 worlds, 1 night, and a truth that would soon connect them in the most dramatic way." Florida greeted me with warm salt air and a horizon streaked in coral and violet. After the overnight flight, the soft humidity felt like a benediction. A bellhop led me to a corner suite, where floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto a moonlit Atlantic. On the dining table waited a chilled bottle of champagne and a card in neat handwriting. "Welcome, Miss Sullivan. Looking forward to our partnership, Victoria Chen. I set down my leather folder and let the quiet settle. While Connecticut reeled in confusion, I stood on the balcony listening to the surf, rehearsing tomorrow's pitch in my mind. For the first time in years, my heart felt completely my own. By noon on Christmas Day, I was awake and focused, reviewing slide decks and running through contingencies. My assistant texted updates. Victoria confirmed 7 p.m. dinner tonight. Board meeting 9 a.m. tomorrow. Everything's locked. Another message followed. Forbes wants to finalize their 40 under 40 cover. Headline: From invisible to invaluable. They'll run it at midnight on the 26th. I typed back. Perfect timing. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my mother scrambled to explain an empty kitchen, a national magazine was preparing to showcase everything she refused to see. I spent the afternoon by the hotel pool with my laptop, sunlight glittering off turquoise water, double-checking financial projections. Each line of data felt like a stone in the foundation I'd laid without anyone's permission. At 6:45 p.m., I entered the private dining room of Pinnacle's flagship resort. Polished wood, soft jazz, ocean light fading to indigo, it felt more like a celebration than a meeting. Victoria Chen arrived 10 minutes late, hair slightly wind-tousled, still in the elegant black dress she'd worn to the Connecticut party. She extended her hand warmly. Lily, it's a pleasure at last. I have to apologize for being late. I just came from the most bizarre Christmas Eve dinner you could imagine. My pulse stayed steady. Oh? I was invited to an elegant dinner in Connecticut. The hostess, Margaret Sullivan, funny coincidence, same last name as you, promised a gourmet feast. Instead, we found an empty kitchen and frantic attempts to order pizza. She gave a light, incredulous laugh. To make it stranger, the mother spent the evening berating her older daughter, calling her unreliable and mentally unstable, all while we waited for delivery pizza on fine china. I held her gaze. That does sound unforgettable. It was, she said, shaking her head. I've attended galas that cost millions, but that evening will be talked about for years. The conversation turned to business, but I sensed the invisible thread between her story and mine tightening with every word. Next morning, December 26th, I stood before Pinnacle's board in a conference room wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass. The Atlantic shimmered below like a promise. My presentation unfolded flawlessly. Growth charts, client testimonials, cost analyses. Every figure reinforced what my heart already knew: we were ready for national scale. Then Victoria's assistant entered with an iPad, her expression curious. Miss Chen, you need to see this. Victoria looked, frowned, then lifted her gaze to me. Lily, this photo is from last night in Connecticut. She turned the screen so the room could see. There it was, a candid shot of my parents' dining room pizza boxes stacked like fallen dominoes, my mother's face tight with embarrassment. In the background, a family portrait hung on the wall. In the corner of that portrait stood a familiar figure, me. A hush fell over the boardroom. Is this you? Victoria asked gently. I drew a breath. Yes, Margaret Sullivan is my mother. She blinked, then let out a quiet, astonished laugh. The daughter your mother called unreliable and unemployable is you, the CEO of Stellar Events I've been trying to meet for 2 years. Yes. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Legal counsel set down his pen. One executive whispered, "Unbelievable." Victoria studied me for a long moment, admiration and amusement mingling in her eyes. So, while we were eating pizza on Waterford Crystal, you were preparing this presentation. I was choosing my company and the people who depend on it over being treated like a servant. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Victoria smiled, slow and bright. Well, that explains the professionalism I sensed from our first email. James, Pinnacle's operations director, broke into a grin. This might be the most dramatic client meeting we've ever had. Around the table, laughter finally bubbled, soft at first, then warm and unforced. Inside me, a lifetime of quiet hurt began to lift. I hadn't needed to shout, to prove, to dramatize. I had simply chosen my own life, and now the truth was shining all by itself. The Florida sunrise slid like liquid gold across the Pinnacle Resort boardroom. I'd been up since 5, running through my slides until every number sang with confidence. Today wasn't just a meeting. It was the day Stellar Events stepped onto a national stage. Victoria Chen entered precisely on time, her energy brisk and bright. Beside her trailed senior executives and legal counsel, laptops already open. The air smelled faintly of ocean salt and strong coffee. "Let's make this official," she said, eyes glinting. I began my presentation, chart by chart. Revenue growth, expansion forecasts, our 8-month waiting list for premium events. Each fact drew quiet nods from her team. When I finished, Victoria leaned back and smiled. "Flawless. Let's talk final terms." As the lawyers fine-tuned a clause or two, I felt a calm I'd never known at any family table. The girl once dismissed as between opportunities was negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal on her own terms. Finally, Victoria slid the contract across the polished table. "Congratulations, Miss Sullivan. Welcome to Pinnacle Hospitality." The moment my pen touched paper, a flood of messages pulsed on my silenced phone. I turned it face down, savoring the stillness of success. Then Victoria's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Before we toast, I made a call you might appreciate." I looked up. "A call? To your mother?" My breath caught. "You called her?" "I did," she said calmly. "I told her I was disappointed in last night's event and would be taking my business elsewhere. She blamed everything on her older daughter on you." That's when I told her the truth. I had just signed a $2 million contract with that very daughter. For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. Around the table, quiet laughter rippled. "The sound she made," Victoria added, "was like the air leaving a room." I finally exhaled. "Thank you for your honesty." "Honesty deserves honesty," she replied, "and respect deserves respect." She raised a sleek phone. "Shall we share the news?" With my nod, she snapped a celebratory photo of us with the signed contract and the Pinnacle executive team, champagne flutes in hand. Moments later, her LinkedIn post went live. "Thrilled to announce our partnership with Stellar Events and their brilliant CEO, Lily Sullivan. Her company's excellence in luxury catering will elevate Pinnacle's guest experience across all properties. Built entirely from scratch, an inspiring story of true entrepreneurship." The room applauded as notifications began pinging on every device. Likes, comments, congratulations flooded in, many from hospitality leaders I admired. Across the table, James from Pinnacle chuckled. "Connecticut's going to wake up buzzing." I finally glanced at my own screen. Dozens of missed calls. My father, Sarah, even my mother, in frantic repetition. New texts arrived faster than I could scroll. "Mom, answer your phone now." "Sarah, is this some kind of joke?" "Dad, your mother is hysterical. Please call." I set the phone down without replying. Their urgency no longer defined me. Victoria poured champagne and raised her glass. "To boundaries and to brilliant women who build without permission." Glasses clinked. The celebration rang with something deeper than business, the sound of a life reclaimed. Outside, Florida's sky blazed with late-morning Sunday. Somewhere far to the north, a Connecticut dining room still smelled faintly of last night's cold pizza. But here, in this bright boardroom, I finally signed the future I'd chosen. The first wave hit before lunch. My phone pulsed with a flood of alerts, texts, voicemails, social notifications. Victoria's LinkedIn post announcing our partnership was rocketing across the hospitality world. It had already been shared hundreds of times and was drawing comments from industry leaders I hadn't heard from in years. Mixed in were the frantic messages from home. "Mom, pick up the phone. This is cruel." "Sarah, tell me this is some PR stunt, please." "Dad, your mother is beside herself. Call when you can." I let them sit. Silence, I'd learned, could be an answer. Just after noon, Forbes published the digital edition of its 40 Under 40 cover story. My face filled the landing page, framed by the headline, "From Invisible to Invaluable: How Lily Sullivan Built a Catering Empire Without a Dollar of Family Money." Friends forwarded screenshots before I'd even opened the article. By the time I clicked, thousands of readers were already commenting. I felt a flicker of awe. This was bigger than I'd dared picture. Meanwhile, Connecticut society was having a field day. Country club acquaintances tagged me in private messages. Is this really you? Your mother always said you were between jobs. By evening, Sarah's texts had turned brittle. Victoria Chen canceled our PR proposal. That was a $500,000 annual contract. Clients are calling with questions we can't answer. The next day brought a rare call from Dad. I let it go to voicemail, then listened alone on the balcony as the Atlantic sparkled. Lily, I need to say something. I knew you were building something. I even saw a business registration years ago when some mail got mixed up. But your mother's version of who you were? It was easier to let that stand than to fight it. I see now that made me complicit. I'm ashamed. I stood very still, letting those words sink in. They didn't erase the past, but they marked a shift, a crack of accountability in a wall of silence. Sarah called next. I answered. Her voice trembled. I was jealous, Lily. Mom always compared us, and I played along. I let her make you the scapegoat. I'm sorry. It was the most unguarded thing she'd ever said to me. I didn't rush to forgive. Instead, I listened, noting the difference between an excuse and an awakening. While they grappled with public fallout, my world surged forward. Within a week of the Forbes article, Stellar Events received over 200 high-end inquiries. 3 new national contracts followed together worth more than $10 million. I promoted Maria to executive chef and James to COO to handle the growth. In the quiet hours, I tended to myself. Long ocean walks, mindful breakfasts, journal entries about what it meant to choose dignity over duty. I realized I didn't crave revenge. What I wanted was clarity, a life where respect wasn't conditional. A week later, Dad left another message. Everyone keeps asking how we could treat our successful daughter like hired help. The truth is, we let a false story define us. I can't undo that, but I can own it. I'm proud of you, Lily. His voice broke slightly on the last words. I felt a knot inside me loosen, not forgiveness yet, but a beginning. By the time January's first snow fell over Connecticut, the old hierarchy of our family had collapsed. Mom lost 3 charity board seats. Sarah's PR firm scrambled to keep clients. Neighbors whispered about pizza on Waterford Crystal, as if it were a legend. And through it all, I stayed steady. Not gloating, not retreating, just living the truth I had chosen. 3 months later, a soft spring dusk settled over Manhattan as I walked into a quiet uptown restaurant. The private room smelled of cedar and citrus candles, nothing like the heavy roasts of my childhood holidays. My parents and Sarah were already seated. They looked smaller than I remembered, less like the flawless hosts of Connecticut parties, and more like people facing their own reflection. I set a single sheet of paper on the table. Before anyone speaks, I said, these are my terms. They leaned forward. The list was short, handwritten in steady ink. Equal respect or no contact. No more servant treatment, ever. Public acknowledgement of my success. A genuine apology, not just words. Therapy, family, and individual. I'll be your daughter, not your servant. Your sister, not your staff. Those are the conditions for rebuilding. Silence pooled like a held breath. Then my mother lowered her gaze. Lily, we've lost so much our reputation, Sarah's clients. But that's not why we're here. We're here to ask for a second chance. My father spoke next. Voice low but sure. I should have defended you years ago. I let convenience shape my silence. I'm sorry. Sarah's turn came softly. I was jealous. Mom made me feel special by making you small. Therapy is helping me see that. Finally, my mother looked up. Her eyes, once sharp as crystal, were wet and unguarded. I turned you into a servant because I feared you might outshine the life I'd planned for you. I am so sorry for every year I refused to see you. I studied their faces. Regret sat beside hope, fragile but real. I'll consider rebuilding, I said, but only as equals. They nodded, relief breaking like light over water. I added one last boundary, a small smile touching my lips. And Mom, if you ever want Stellar Events to cater anything, you'll pay full price. For the first time in months, she managed a faint laugh. Fair. 6 months later, I hosted our first true family dinner, this time in my space. A sunlit 2-bedroom overlooking Central Park, the apartment they had never bothered to visit. My team from Stellar Events handled every detail. I didn't lift a pan. That too was non-negotiable. As servers moved gracefully through the room, I raised my glass. Success doesn't need permission, self-worth doesn't require validation, and respect is non-negotiable. My mother met my eyes and nodded. She had already stood before her country club peers to admit how blind she'd been. Sarah had restructured her PR firm, humbly submitting a proposal to handle Stellar Events Media, one I promised to review like any other vendor. Dad now introduced me, everywhere and without prompting, as my daughter, the CEO. Looking around that table, I felt no need for triumph. What I felt was truth. We were no longer the family that needed a scapegoat. We were something new, imperfect, but honest. Later, as dusk deepened over the park, I stepped onto my balcony and breathed in the city night. My company had grown to 100 employees in 5 cities. The Food Network documentary about my journey was in final edits, and every morning, I still began the day with the same quiet affirmation. I'm Lily Sullivan, CEO of Stellar Events, not the family servant, never again. To anyone listening now, your value never depends on someone else's ability to see it. Choose yourself. Build the life that proves it.